Today on the podcast, a special Black History Month presentation. Profiles in Courage, the 7 Black Medal of Honor, recipients of World War II.
As an officer, Vernon vividly recalled the time before they shipped out.
The rumor, as you know, as rumors go, the rumors was that we're going overseas because the war was hot and heavy then. So one day, all of the second lieutenants were called, the black second lieutenants were called to the division headquarters, taken around the back of the building, and were sitting under a tree, and the chief of staff came out and made a little speech, said, "We're going overseas." He said, "Now all the white boys are going overseas and getting killed. Now it's time for the black boys to go get killed."
I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. February is Black History Month, and my book Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, is out now. The book chronicles these immortal heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle up until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you check out the book or audiobook to discover more as we celebrate Black History Month. Just visit my website at robchild.net or any major retailer. In 1945, when Congress began reviewing the records of deserving recipients for the Medal of Honor, no black soldiers were awarded the honor out of the millions in uniform, even though a few were recommended for the award. But in 1991, when the Department of Defense decided to look into the matter, they commissioned a study at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, an historically black college, to determine deserving recipients. 9 candidates were recommended, but only 7 ended up being awarded the Medal of Honor. The base criteria was that they had to have been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, with the exception of Reuben Rivers, who had received the Silver Star. In this episode, Profiles in Courage, you'll learn much about these heroic men, and we'll begin with Charles Thomas.
Born in Birmingham, Alabama, Charles Thomas grew up in Detroit, Michigan, where his family was part of the city's black economic boom of the early 20th century. Charles's father, Horace, worked for Ford Motor Company, and they owned their own home on Detroit's west side. Charles was midway through his junior year at Wayne University and working part-time as a skilled molder at Ford's Dearborn complex when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941. He was drafted into the Army just over a month later, on January 20th, 1942. And as most Michigan residents did, Thomas started his military journey at Fort Custer just outside of Battle Creek, 130 miles west of Detroit. In April 1942, Charles transferred to Camp Walters, Texas, for additional infantry training in the new tank destroyer battalions that were forming. On November 21st, 1941, General George C. Marshall had activated the new tank destroyer force. They were charged with the mission to seek, strike, and destroy enemy tanks. Charles benefited from 2 new Army policies, both implemented in 1942, that directly impacted African American recruits. First, the push to form black combat tank destroyer battalions, and second, the officer corps mandate to train more black officers. Thomas stood out among his peers with his mechanical engineering aptitude and several years of college behind him. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in March 1943, Thomas transferred to Camp Hood in Texas and began his service with the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion, becoming Charlie Company commander, which included a headquarters detachment, a medical detachment, and 3 tank destroyer platoons with approximately 50 men. His unit entered combat in the European theater in early September 1944 and immediately saw action. But 3 short months later, December 14, 1944, would come his greatest test.
With the formation of Task Force Blackshear, Charles had 250 men under his command and 4-towed M5 3-inch howitzers. The objective of the tank destroyer force was to draw German fire, while American infantry and tanks encircled the town of Kleimbach, France. Charles volunteered to take 2 of his guns forward up the foggy road into Kleimbach, and they were hit almost immediately by German 88 shells. Then Charles and his command car struck a mine, which blew him and several other men out of the vehicle. He was bleeding from several wounds to his legs and arms with his ears ringing, and several machine gun rounds caught Thomas across the chest. Though severely wounded, he said his only thought, he said in an interview afterward, was, "Deploy the artillery, start firing, or we're dead." The battle only intensified with Charles's 2 reserve guns brought up. After 4 hours of combat, 3 guns were destroyed by enemy artillery, and the 4th was out of ammunition. But American infantry was able to encircle the town, and Charles was medically evacuated. Colonel Blackshear, watching the battle, wrote afterwards that this was the most magnificent display of heroism he had ever witnessed. Blackshear was so impressed by Charles's actions, he submitted his name for the Distinguished Service Cross. Charles's unit, the 3rd Platoon, Company C, sustained more than 50% casualties in the battle and was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the first black unit in World War II to receive the award. Charles was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his combat actions at the White House ceremony in 1997. Our next Medal of Honor recipient is Vernon Baker.
Born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, Vernon Baker was raised by his grandparents from the age of 4 after his parents were killed in a car crash. After basic at Camp Walters, Texas, he joined the 370th Infantry Regiment at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Promoted quickly to staff sergeant, then sent to officer candidate school at Fort Benning, he graduated as a 2nd lieutenant in January 1943. As an officer, Vernon vividly recalled the time before they shipped out.
The rumor, as you know, as rumors go, the rumors was that we're going overseas because the war was hot and heavy then. So one day, all of the 2nd lieutenants were called, the black 2nd lieutenants were called to the division headquarters, taken around the back of the building, and were sitting under a tree, and the chief of staff came out and made a little speech, said, "We're going overseas." He said, "Now all the white boys are going overseas and getting killed." He said, "All this time the white boys are going overseas and getting killed. Now it's time for the black boys to go get killed." And that was our, or I say that was our initiation into war. And it is very ironic that one of the first casualties when we got overseas in combat was the chief of staff of the division, or the 92nd Division. And I had I wouldn't say the pleasure, but I had the displeasure of taking a patrol out to recover his body.
Baker's unit, the 370th, was part of the 92nd Division under General Ned Almond, who was well known for his prejudiced comments about the ability of black troops in combat. The 92nd was struggling to break through Hitler's Gothic line in Italy in an area called the Triangle of Death.
The whole regiment had been trying to take those hills, and battalion by battalion, the 1st battalion went up, they got cut to pieces trying to get up there. Came back, there was a lull, and then 2nd battalion got the mission. They went up, got cut to pieces, and when they got back down, or were driven back down, we knew it was our turn. So on the morning of the 5th of April, 1945, we were ordered to take Hill X.
It was not only Hill X, but Hills Y and Z, in an area called the Triangle of Death. And Vernon's weapons platoon of 26 men made it up the Castle Fortress objective deeper into enemy territory than any previous assault. It was such hard fighting that Vernon's newly arrived company commander, Captain John Runyon, who had never seen combat, hid in a shed, and ended up retreating alone without Baker and the men. Vernon found out later that his company commander told regimental command that Vernon's men had been all wiped out, so no reinforcements were ever sent. Baker remained securing the strategic German castle fortress that 2 battalions of his regiment had been unable to reach. He lost 19 of his 26 men in the action before he withdrew back down the hill. He went on to be the only living black recipient out of the 7 selected from World War II to be awarded the Medal of Honor in person at the ceremony in 1997, and he told CNN afterwards, "I still don't feel like a hero. I just feel I was a soldier and I did my job." Our next Medal of Honor recipient is Willie James, Jr.
Willie James, Jr. was born on March 18, 1920 in Kansas City, Missouri, and grew up there the only child of a widowed mother, Lillian. He was drafted into the Army in September 1942, but before he left Kansas City he married, not even having time for a proper honeymoon with wife Val Cinney. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies were faced with shortages of men due to attrition. The oversupply of black soldiers serving in supply units like the Red Ball Express and other outfits was matched by the undersupply of white replacement soldiers for rifle companies on the front lines. On December 26, 1944, an official call went out from General Eisenhower in a 3-paragraph confidential letter disseminated to all units. The letter offered black troops serving in service roles the opportunity for combat training. New combat units consisting of black soldiers commanded by white officers would become known as 5th platoons. Willie was one of more than 2,200 black soldiers selected for an expedited 4-week training course at the Ground Forces Reinforcement Center in France. He emerged as Private First Class James, a scout with the 413th Infantry Regiment. Willie was part of the 5th Platoon of G Company attached to the 2nd Platoon, which was commanded by 35-year-old Purple Heart recipient, 1st Lieutenant Armand J. Sarabella. On March 21, 1945, Willie's platoon joined the 413th at Cologne as part of the 104th ID and rolled 25 miles south in a convoy deep into the Rhine Valley. The Rhine River represented the final natural barrier into the heartland of Germany. Crossing the Rhine, they met and fought through stiff resistance, including dug in Waffen SS units. But on April 8, 1945, in the fog-shrouded village of Lippoldsburg, they would face their greatest test.
On that foggy morning, James was sent ahead scouting the town, then reported back to Sarabella on German positions. Sarabella decided to enter Lippoldsburg, and Willie headed out once again, with his commander on the opposite side of the road. The men in the platoon followed in 3 rifle squads. Unfortunately, the fog had dissipated a great deal. James, on the south side of the street, cautiously moved forward. He constantly checked Lieutenant Sarabella, who was hand-signaling the platoon 10 yards to the north. Suddenly, Willie heard a German shout about 100 yards ahead. The soldier called an alarm. Sarabella had little time to react as he was cut down by a sniper. Willie rushed to his commander and tried to grab his shoulders with both hands to pull him to safety, but was struck and killed by machine gun fire. The heroism and sacrifice inspired the platoon, and the 104th Division was able to push through the bridgehead, allowing the armor to push forward. Willie James's widow, Val Cinney, accepted the Medal of Honor on his behalf at the White House in 1997. Our next Medal of Honor recipient is Sergeant Edward Carter, Jr.
Born in Los Angeles of missionary parents but raised in India and Shanghai, China, Sergeant Edward Carter, Jr. was born to be a soldier. In late January 1932, when the Japanese attacked the international settlement in Shanghai, Carter ran away from home and joined the Chinese 19th Army. Carter was welcomed into the 19th. They were desperate for fighting men. Even a boy from the local military academy could fill a gap in the trenches. He soon demonstrated both his marksmanship and bravery, and was poised to be elevated to lieutenant. However, a month into his service, Carter's father arrived at the 19th's headquarters in search of his son. Edward's commander was stunned to learn young Edward was only 15 and underage, and his father wanted him back home. Later, back in Los Angeles, in the mid-1930s, when civil war broke out in Spain, Carter sided with the embattled Loyalist Republican forces. He had seen firsthand how fascism had become a significant military threat. Upon his arrival in Spain, Carter mustered in with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Edward didn't realize it at the time, but he was fighting on behalf of the communists, and this would come to haunt him later in life. Surviving the war in Spain, he decided to enlist in the U.S. Army on September 26, 1941. Carter was stationed at Fort Benning as part of a quartermaster truck company, but answered Eisenhower's call in late 1944 for black combat training. He was subsequently assigned to the 12th Armored Division, 56th Armored Infantry Battalion D Company. The 12th Armored was Patton's Mystery Division force that spearheaded into hostile, unscouted German territory after removing all uniform insignia and vehicle markings. Carter, as part of this exceptionally dangerous mission, would learn on March 23, 1945, just how dangerous it was.
As Carter and his squad rode atop a tank en route near Speyer, Germany, the ear-splitting recoil of a Panzerfaust from a nearby abandoned warehouse rocked the vehicle in front of them. Carter volunteered to lead a three-man squad in a dash across the field. One soldier behind him was riddled with machine gun fire almost immediately, and Carter shouted to the others to cover him, then retreat back to the road. Carter darted forward, then looked back as his two remaining men were struck by German fire in their retreat back to the road. He knew retreat was no longer an option, and he had to advance. He leapt up, zigzagging his way forward as German machine gun fire carved up his left arm, hitting him 3 times. However, he was still on his feet, and continued moving forward until a sharp stabbing pain in his left leg toppled him over. Carter, with his Thompson submachine gun, decided to wait the Germans out. He knew they would come looking for him, and he had hatched a plan. His plan was, as a German patrol neared, he would jam his Thompson into the ground to lift himself up and take out as many as he could. After 2 hours, his opportunity came. He had his Thompson under his chest playing dead, and the patrol came upon him, shouting an alarm in German. He thrust the Thompson out, threw all his weight on his right leg to push himself up, then kept his finger on the trigger as he executed his plan. In seconds, 6 Germans fell dead as Carter grabbed the shaken and stunned remaining 2 soldiers who'd raised their hands in surrender. With superhuman strength, ignoring his pain, Carter pulled one soldier in front of him and the other behind him, using them as human shields to make his way back to his position on the road. Both German and American soldiers looked on in awe. Arriving safely back behind the American lines, Carter began interrogating the prisoners in German. He had learned the language at Shanghai Military Academy. The POWs cooperated, pointing out hidden enemy strongholds on a map. The information they provided was accurate. It allowed the 12th Armored to clear the road and continue advancing into Speyer with minimal loss of life. Carter was awarded the Medal of Honor in January 1997 posthumously, and his commanding officer, Captain Blair, joined Carter's family for the White House ceremony. Our next Medal of Honor recipient is George Watson.
The brutal Deep South world into which George Watson was born had changed little since the Civil War. The Watsons themselves were sharecroppers who only a generation earlier had been former slaves. It was a back-breaking life in sweltering Starkville, Mississippi. As young George grew, turning 6 in 1920, he began attending a Rosenwald school. Here he discovered a love of learning and an aptitude for math. Weekends were spent fishing and swimming with his older brothers at Oktibbeha County Lake. George was an accomplished swimmer, a skill he would use later in the war. Just before the Great Depression tightened its grip, Watson decided to leave for the big city, Birmingham, Alabama. In 1932, at age 18, he moved in with his widowed grandmother, Emma Gaines, 59, who lived in the city. Here he became a firefighter and met and married Nanny Hood. His ambition, however, could not be held back. He saved enough money, applied and was accepted into Colorado State at Fort Collins. But this led to the dissolution of his marriage. Upon graduation in 1942, George was immediately drafted and sent to Camp Lee, Virginia, to train as a laundry specialist in the Quartermaster Corps. By late January 1943, Watson arrived in the Southwest Pacific Theater docking in Brisbane, Australia. The 29th Quartermaster Regiment 2nd Battalion was headquartered at Port Moresby, New Guinea. George was assigned to U.S. Army Transport, Jacob. It was part of a seaborne convoy operation, Operation Lilliput, ferrying troops, weapons, and other supplies in a regular transport service. On March 8, 1943, near 1 o'clock aboard the Jacob, after Watson had finished lunch in the galley, he and a friend went topside. It was a clear day and 78 degrees, a beautiful day, which held no hint of the horrors to come.
Those horrors were 2 squadrons of 9 Japanese Betty bombers escorted by 12 fighters, fast approaching in a V formation. The Japanese bombers flew low, scoring 3 direct hits in succession, rocking the Jacob. The ship, completely ablaze and sinking, was ordered abandoned. Watson, who had made it to a raft, could see crewmen still trying to leap off the ship and others floundering in the water, and he left the raft and swam toward them. Grabbing men one at a time who were frantically paddling to stay afloat, Watson pulled them to rafts and other floating debris surrounding the ship. George then saw a sailor who was waving his arms, and his head kept dipping below the water near the Jacob. The vessel was almost entirely submerged. Watson swam toward the struggling sailor, but it was too late. At 1:16 p.m., the 3,000-ton ship sank beneath the waves. The sinking of the enormous ship created a powerful vortex of suction that dragged Watson and the men near the vessel instantly under, deep into the ocean's depths. They were powerless against the suction force the descending ship created. For Watson's heroic efforts in saving his comrades and his commanding officer, with utter disregard for his own life, he was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross on June 13, 1943. He was the first Black American service member to receive the award in World War II. He was finally awarded the country's highest military honor for valor for his heroic sacrifice when President Clinton elevated his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor. Our next Medal of Honor recipient is Reuben Rivers.
Reuben Rivers and his 11 brothers and sisters grew up in Hotluka, Oklahoma, which became an oil-rich boomtown when oil was struck in March 1926. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the draft board ordered Reuben in January 1942 to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, assigned to a new black tank battalion that was forming the 761st. He joined Able Company and rose to become a staff sergeant. His commander was Captain David Williams. In May 1944, General Patton had sent an urgent message to the War Department requesting more tankers. Apparently, the response back to him was that the only ones left were the colored tankers. Reportedly, he said, "Who the hell asked for color? I requested tankers." On June 9th, Major Bates, commander of the 761st, announced that the battalion had been alerted at Patton's request for movement overseas. They entered combat in the ETO almost immediately, assigned to support the infantry. In their first action, a mined tree trunk lay across the road blocking the armored advance. Rivers, in the rear of the tank column, took it upon his own initiative to head up to the front and clear the roadblock. He jumped out of his Sherman tank under intense enemy fire and attached a tow cable to the mined tree and dragged it off the road, clearing the way for the advance. It was for this heroic action that Reuben Rivers was awarded the Silver Star. Able Company pressed forward in early November 1944, with Reuben now the lead tanker. Rivers in front neared a railroad crossing. An ear-splitting explosion rocked his Sherman from a hidden Teller anti-tank mine. Rivers' right leg was badly injured, but he refused to be evacuated. He told his commander, Captain Williams, they were going to need him. Captain Williams agreed. Reuben was the best they had, but it was not to last.
On November 19, 1944, nearing the deserted appearing town of Gebling, Reuben, in the lead, commanded a 2-tank section. Concealed in the town were German 75mm anti-tank guns and German tanks. Rivers ordered his driver to roll forward as tracers ricocheted off the front of the tank. Rivers shouted to his gunner to steady on the target. They were 200 yards away from German guns. They would get no further. According to a war correspondent witness, 2 German shells were fired point-blank at Rivers' tank. The explosions cracked the Sherman and killed Rivers and his crew instantly. In 1993, when the Army study was commissioned at Shaw University, Reuben's former commander, Captain Williams, petitioned to have Rivers considered as he had formally submitted him for the Medal of Honor. In the end, Rivers' name was added to the recommendations, and he was selected to receive the Medal of Honor. Captain Williams attended the White House ceremony in 1997 with the Rivers family. Interviewed afterward, he said, "You have to understand. In battle, you fight for each other. The pride in the unit, you have a cohesion," Williams said, then paraphrased Shakespeare's Henry V. "When men fight shoulder to shoulder and bleed and die for a just cause, they become brothers." Our final Medal of Honor recipient is Lieutenant John Fox.
From Woodlawn, Ohio, John Fox was accepted into Ohio State University, but decided to transfer out to Wilberforce University because it was one of only 3 historically black colleges in the country that offered ROTC training. And John was set on a career in the military. Upon graduation in 1941, Fox joined the newly activated all-black 366th Infantry Regiment at Fort Devens in Massachusetts. The 366th was exceptional in that all the officers were black except for its first commander, who was white. The black officers principally came from either the Wilberforce or Howard University ROTC units. Fox became commander of Anti-Tank M Company and later Cannon Company. In 1942, while on duty in Boston, he met the woman who would become his wife, Arlene Marrow, and they had a daughter, Sandra. At Fort Devens, John also met and became good friends with Otis Zachary, who would play a pivotal role in his life during the war. The 366th embarked for the Italian Theater in late March 1944, becoming part of the 92nd Division. At first, they were mainly assigned rear echelon roles, but on December 1, 1944, Fox and the 366th were welcomed into the combat zone personally by General Ned Almond. In a speech Almond gave to them at Barga, General Almond said, "I did not send for you. Your Negro newspapers, Negro politicians, and white friends have insisted on your seeing combat, and I shall see that you get combat and your share of the casualties." With the Forward Observer post in Samo Colonia in Tuscany needing to be manned over the Christmas holiday, Fox decided to volunteer for the extended 4-day Christmas posting. Others could have been assigned, but he volunteered. It was a lonely assignment on the top floor of a 46-foot medieval stone tower. It would be his final assignment of the war.
At 0450 hours on December 26th, a German mortar struck the 12th century church bell tower, less than 50 feet from Fox's location on the top floor of La Rocca Tower. A heavy German artillery barrage immediately followed this clanging first strike. Fox and his 2 men, Malavet and Williams, with him called in counterfire. Fox was on the radio with Sergeant Wyatt at the 598th Battery providing coordinates. Between 0600 and 0700 all fell silent as the Germans were preparing an infantry assault from 2 different directions. Defending Samacolonia on the ground were 75 infantrymen from the 366th and 25 Italian partisans. The Germans outnumbered them 3-1. Just after 7 a.m., the enemy assault began, and Fox called in artillery fire. During the next several hours, Fox saw his dying men being overwhelmed, even resorting to hand-to-hand combat. By 10:30 hours, Fox saw it was hopeless and told his 2 men to retreat down out of the tower while he stayed and made a life-changing decision. Fox switched from the radio over to the phone to give coordinates closer to the town and instructed Sergeant Wyatt to fire high explosives. Then, after 10 minutes, a smoke round, so any of their men left in the town could escape. Then, close to 1100 hours, Fox gave his own position to Sergeant Wyatt. Wyatt refused to fire on his own man, but transferred the call to Fire Direction Center, where Fox's close friend Otis Zachary answered the call with John's shocking request. It had to be approved by General Truscott. Approval was granted within minutes and sent back to Fox's commander, Colonel Ross, who instructed Otis to punch in John's coordinates for an initial salvo. Colonel Ross paused and told John they would honor his request, but asked him one last time if he was sure about it. John yelled into the phone, "Yes, damn it. There are more of them than there are of us. Fire it. Give 'em hell." The salvo was fired, and John was killed. His widow, Arlene Fox, attended the Medal of Honor ceremony in 1997 with John's friend, Otis Zachary, who never forgave himself for his friend's death. And now, I'd like to close with brief comments from President Bill Clinton from the Medal of Honor ceremony in 1997.
No African American who deserved the Medal of Honor for his service in World War II received it. Today, we fill the gap in that picture and give a group of heroes who also loved peace but adapted themselves to war the tribute that has always been their due. Now and forever, the truth will be known about these African Americans who gave so much that the rest of us might be free. Today, we recognize 7 men as being among the bravest of the brave. Each of them distinguished himself with extraordinary valor in the famous words, "At the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty." But when victory was complete in World War II, our government made a pledge to correct cases in which medals of honor were deserved but not awarded. Today, America honors that pledge. On behalf of the United States Congress, I award the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military award, to Vernon Baker, Edward Carter Jr., John Fox, Willie F. James Jr., Reuben Rivers, Charles Thomas, and George Watson. Today, America is profoundly thankful for the patriotism and the nobility of these men, and for the example they set, which helped us to find the way to become a more just, more free nation. They helped America to become more worthy of them and more true to its ideals. To the families of the recipients who are gone, may you take comfort in the honor that has finally been done to your loved ones, and may God embrace their souls. And God bless you, Vernon Baker, and God bless America. And to all of you, again, I say, your nation thanks you, and God bless you.
Thank you for joining us for this special Black History Month episode, Profiles in Courage. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.